Hello and welcome to Pemberley and Beyond. I'm Kat, your guide through the ever-expanding world of Jane Austen-inspired fanfiction. Expect new lives, new loves, fresh drama, and the tropes that just keep turning up, rather like Wickham at the door of a wealthy young heiress. In this episode, we are truly immersing ourselves in the world of Jane Austen as we join the main character, Mary Davies, in Bath, England, for a spot of historical and literary escapism. That's right, this episode I am going to be talking about The Austen Escape by Katherine Reay. Published in 2017, this novel piqued my interest because of the potential directions the plot could have gone in based on the blurb. Now, feel free to pour yourself a cup of your favourite brew. Today, I'm savouring the delicate citrus notes of Lady Grey tea. Okay, cup at the ready? Then let me set the stage with the blurb. Mary Davies lives and works in Austin, Texas, as an industrial engineer. She has an orderly and productive life, a job and colleagues that she enjoys, particularly a certain adorable, intelligent and hilarious consultant. But something is missing for Mary. When her estranged and emotionally fragile childhood friend Isabel Dwyer offers Mary a 2-week stay in a gorgeous manor house in Bath, Mary reluctantly agrees to come along in hopes that the holiday will shake up her quiet life in just the right ways. Mary thinks she's heading for a quaint little holiday. We, the audience, know she's really stepping into the Austen experience, with all its stays, socializing, and a liberal dash of chaos. But Mary gets more than she bargained for when Isabel loses her memory and fully believes that she lives in Regency, England. Mary becomes dependent on a household of strangers to take care of Isabel until she wakes up. With Mary in charge and surrounded by new friends, Isabel rests and enjoys the leisure of a Regency lady. But life gets even more complicated when Mary makes the discovery that her life and Isabel's have intersected in more ways than she knew, and she finds herself caught between who Isabel was, who she seems to be, and the man who stands between them. Outings are undertaken, misunderstandings play out, and dancing ensues as this triangle works out their lives and hearts among a company of clever, well-informed people who have a great deal of conversation. Before we go any further, I would like to apologize if I sound incredibly nasal today. I've been ill for the last couple of weeks, and I'm still feeling quite sick, so apologies that my voice sounds utterly horrific. And with that said, let's get on with the show. All this talk of living in Regency England leads us to our first trope, immersive Regency experience. Okay, please hear me out, as this one doesn't appear in Tropedia. My elevator pitch for it is that it's like the play within a play trope, but on Regency-flavoured steroids. Are you on board? If not, hang in there and let me talk it through. This is a sort of meta-Austen trope, where instead of simply retelling Pride and Prejudice or remixing Darcy and Lizzie into new guises, the author builds a whole narrative device around people consciously stepping into Austen's world. It might be a literal costume holiday, like in Austenland, a time slip, as seen in Lost in Austen, or in the case of the Austen Escape, a group of modern characters living as though they're in Regency England. What fascinates me about this trope is how it plays double duty. On the one hand, it gives us the wish fulfillment fantasy of gowns and tea parties and gentlemen in regimentals. On the other, it acts as a magnifying glass for modern relationships. Once you strip away phones, jobs, and modern distractions, what are you left with? Just people trying, often failing, to connect. While I've watched the film version of Austenland many times, I've always been a little hesitant to read it for reasons I'm about to elaborate on. So technically, it's my first time reading anything set in the Austen experience verse. I wasn't totally sure what to expect from the characters. I think that's in part because of what an immersive Regency experience entails, to my mind, in this genre. Okay, this is going to sound a little wild, as it's my first time articulating this thought out loud, and so it's probably going to come out a bit wrong. Hard as it might be to believe, seeing as you're listening to me ramble on in a podcast, I'm not used to discussing Jaff with others, and I could definitely benefit from a co-host to argue the toss with sometimes. So I'm going to lightly touch upon my main gripe and allow you, gentle listener, to think of your own counterpoints about what I say. So my gripe? To my mind, the all-immersive Austen experience tends to be all flounce and low fidelity. To me, it screams an almost imperialistic form of tourism, a kind of playful literary colonialism for the wealthy elite. This was reflected in the film version of Austenland. All the ladies who have booked into Mrs. Wattlesbrook experience are from North America, which may seem like a throwaway gripe, but I do get frustrated by just how wild some of the visions of England and Englishness are when handled by a North American author. But back to the burden of my tangential ditty. Austenland. With the exception of the Darcy-loving Jane Hayes, none of the guests seem to have the first clue about Jane Austen or her work. Instead, they're there for the thrill of the romance, the English authenticity. Several of the remaining romance elements of the Austenland plot were so unethical as to be squirm-inducing. I was never completely sure exactly which of the characters or which attitudes the film was poking fun at. I was never completely sure to what degree this was, for want of a better word, a parable of something. Was it the parable of the Austenites? The parable of incosification with stuffed birds as the signifier? Now, my caveat here is that I've not yet read the Austenland novel, and perhaps I should for a future episode. But my hesitation explains why I wasn't sure how this version of the immersive Austen trope would play out. What surprised me, and pleasantly so, was Ray's grounding in Austen herself. Rather than just costume drama cosplay, she uses the setting to explore friendship, rivalry, and identity, which means the trope lands with far more literary heft than I was expecting. In a twist on the usual Austen fangirl as protagonist, Mary is actually rather reluctant about the whole Braithwaite House experience. She's not a wide-eyed romantic rushing to don a bonnet. Her hesitation is partly to do with her relationship with Austen's work, partly about her relationship with Isabel, and very much about how both those relationships have shaped her own life. But here's the thing. As Isabel dives deeper into her Regency roleplay, and as Mary negotiates her feelings about Gertrude, the others, and her own place in the house, the very structure of the immersive Regency experience becomes a kind of cipher for truth. And then comes the moment that really stuck with me. Just as Mary and Isabel finally manage to have the honest, painful, necessary conversation they've been circling for the whole book, they quite literally stumble out of the immersive world and into 21st century Bath. They move from manicured grounds and borrowed gowns to cropped grass and streets full of tourists who immediately see them as cosplayers. Out come the cameras, the selfies, the delighted strangers. It's funny, yes, and it was also strangely poignant, because this is the heart of the trope, the fragile boundary between immersion and reality. The costumes and rituals gave us a stage on which characters reveal themselves, as does Isabel's amnesia. But at the end of the day, reality is waiting just outside the garden wall, just outside that amnesia, ready to remind everyone that the performance was always just that. And maybe that's the truest Austen move of all. To let fantasy play out, but to insist on grounding it in the awkward, often unromantic social world we actually inhabit. And as I've just touched upon, trope 2, which I call, who am I again? Yes, the trope of amnesia. Ordinarily, I run from it like Mr. Collins from the merest hint of irony on account of how often it is lazily inserted into the plot. Allow me to present Exhibit A, the amnesia story arc in C-drama series The Heiress, from 2020, I think it was released. Okay, picture this. 20 episodes in, each episode 45 minutes long, mind you, excluding adverts. The heroine jumps off a cliff, already trope-tastic if you know your C-drama. She promptly develops amnesia, and the male lead? He takes advantage of her memory loss to pretend they've been married for years and have even done the deed. He then proceeds to hold her hostage in his mansion in what can only be described as a bizarre, sexless version of 365 Days. If this deceit had been discovered, her reputation would have been utterly destroyed, just as it would have been in the Regency era if an unmarried lady had been found living under a man's roof. I cannot overemphasize the horror. The previously whimsical romance was unceremoniously slapped out of the series by the slimy tentacles of this abomination of a trope. So yes, I flinch whenever amnesia turns up. But in the Austen escape, Isabel's memory loss wasn't as overstated. If anything, it left me wanting more. That feels so wrong to say. Her living regency persona is handled with just enough ambiguity. Is she retreating into fantasy to escape reality? And which reality is she escaping from? The news about her father, or the knowledge that she's crossed a line with her seduction of Mary's crush? Ray doesn't overplay it, which made it all strangely compelling. However, as the novel wrapped up, I found myself wishing that there had been a more concrete medical explanation as to what exactly had triggered Isabel's amnesia, or that Mary had been able to work out what had brought it about for the first time. I know that this could have gone against the strongly Christian vibe of the novel. Was there something very dark in all the neglect that was mentioned? Nonetheless, I wished that there could have been a firm explanation in order to anchor this trope, as its semi-unexplained appearance rendered a sizable chunk of the story almost amateur JAFF. What can I say? I like things explained to me as if I were 5. And on to our third and final trope of the episode, the frenemy. Ray really threw both the trope textbook and the Austen-approved matchmaking flair at this one, and I found myself enjoying it. Isabel, Mary's bestie, is anything but that. It is revealed over the course of the novel that Isabel's competitiveness and her very freneminess has slowly stripped away many of Mary's passions in life. Everything to do with her relationship with her mother, or almost everything. Her love of music, of the piano in particular, and also her love of Jane Austen. When Gertrude seems to see through Isabel's false friendliness from the start, and instead hits it off with Mary, we start to see an unravelling in how Isabel perceives herself. Over the course of the novel, Mary heals a part of herself by becoming close to Gertrude, and vice versa in a sort of mother-daughter substitute relationship. The rivalry also spills into Mary's love life. From Isabel's first appearance with her latest squeeze, TCG, we sense that she may have set her sights on Nathan, Mary's long-standing crush. We may as well call the pair of them Betty and Veronica. If you don't know the Betty and Veronica trope, one is wholesome and underappreciated, the other is glamorous and problematic. Both vie for Archie's affections throughout, and I'll let you guess which character is which in this novel. When Nathan flies over to Bath without a second thought to be there for Mary, it's already abundantly clear that he's plumping for Mary, as long as she chooses to be with him. Why do I feel that the Austen escape channels a Jane Austen-approved matchmaking flair? Well, in spite of Isabel being a grade A harpy with almost no redeeming features to speak of, she ends up in a seemingly happy and stable relationship. I know you might say in reply that Austen shows unhappily wed couples and hints at pairings where feelings will one day be lost and material assets gained through marriage that have not yet lost their charm. But she also hints that two people who are both truly enamored with one another have a shot at true happiness, even among the sub-characters. In that same tradition, Ray hints that as long as Isabel continues to be good and not to see life as a game of one-upmanship, she will be happy in her own relationship with a man in regimentals. Of all things, a relationship with a loyal soldier is certainly something Austen would approve of. And to follow on in this Austen-esque tradition, I am going to go out on a limb and say that as Isabel has dropped a rung in the class, or rather classiness rankings compared to our main character Mary, it also makes it easier for Mary to drop her. In an almost Emma-esque twist, I think Ray gives Mary permission to drop Isabel, much as Emma drops Harriet. Earlier in the novel, Isabel even suggests Mary take the part of Harriet, so there is a true inversion going on there that I really enjoyed. Can an inventor heroine really remain bosom friends with a soldier's wife in a gardener's cottage? More to the point, can she remain friends with a woman who's tried to take the only man she's been interested in from her? I know that when I strip away the romance element and make it more a class-based thing, it sounds snobbish, but Austen herself wouldn't have seen this as far-fetched. And as Ray is so steeped in Austen's work, perhaps she might not see this as such a great leap of imagination on my part. So, in summary, I know I've trounced a few of the tropes in this novel, but I loved Ray's writing style. In case you're not familiar with her other work, she's built up a stonking great back catalogue of Austen-inspired novels. She's even branched into the world of the Brontes, judging by the title, The Bronte Plot. The blurb of the Austen escape alone casually drops in a quote from Persuasion, and the Austen escape is peppered not just with quotes from various Austen novels, but also nods to characters, with parallels running between amnesiac Isabel and Isabella Thorpe among others. Theme naming, a noble trope indeed. The story even has a list of Jane Austen characters who pop up in the Austen escape just to highlight their backstories and motivations. And now let's step beyond Pemberley into this month's companion read, aka the Hocus Tropus. To my mind, this is like a wine and cheese pairing, only for tropes. Every episode, I take one prominent trope from the main fanfiction book and recommend a second novel, one not set in the Austen verse, that contains the same trope, but done differently. Magic, right? This episode's Hocus Tropus recommendation picks up on the frenemy trope. After a lot of deliberation, I decided on the Dawn of the Clans prequels by Erin Hunter. If you haven't read the Warrior Cats series, be prepared to buckle in. It is a multi-character, multi-story arc that touched me deeply when I was younger. And with this Hocus Tropus recommendation charmingly bespelled to you, I'm going to hop down from my digital soapbox and make my way backstage, as it were, to Cat's Corner, part of the show where I pour us all another cuppa and spend a minute or two talking about whatever's on my mind. I've been thinking a lot about the dating scene and about just how brutal it is to be out in it at any age, but especially as one gets older. I've just finished reading a book called Dating the Kiwi Male, mostly true tales from Kiwi women. As you might expect, it's charming, awkward, and hilarious in equal parts, but I wasn't prepared for the emotional right hooks that were thrown up as the dust of the chapter's escapade settled. Take, for example, the lady who chose to live in a place that made her happiest, instead of moving to an area where she might meet someone. And I mean that in the purest sense, as she lives in a very remote part of the west coast of New Zealand. Or take the 50-year-old who was catfished by a man 20 years her senior using photos of himself from when he was her age. She stuck around for a few pints with him and wondered whether her own life would turn out the same way as his, living on a high country station, that's a remote sheep or cattle grazing farm in New Zealand, plagued by aches and pains from a very physically demanding life, and not just alone, but lonely. I know that being single is infinitely preferable to being unhappy, unfulfilled, or just plain unsafe in a relationship. I've made that choice in the past, and I would do so again if I had to. But there's something about loneliness, especially others, that makes a lump rise in my throat every time. And yet there's something almost Austen-esque about it all to me. The longing for connection, the careful weighing of social circumstances against the heart's desires, the small everyday choices, or in some cases absence of options, that shape a life. Perhaps less Austen and more Gaskell, as there is a wider range of social classes and a sharper dose of social commentary, and the reminder that love stories are as much about society as they are about hearts. But that, dear listener, is quite enough philosophizing over one pot of tea. Let's pop the lid back on it and step outside into the bright, brisk air of Pemberley and beyond. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. If you've made it this far, consider following this podcast so you can join me on future rambles through the wilds of Jaff. Until next time, may your tea stay hot, your tropes well executed, and your Mr. Darcy tolerable, I suppose.